So, from what I've just said there, why do you think we're given a meditation object? Why would we have a meditation object?
To allow us to be aware of when our mind drifts from that object.
Yes. We have a meditation object during mindfulness practice, so we have a reference point, so we know when our attention moves. So say if we're doing mindfulness of breathing, being aware of the breath as it comes in and goes out, we remember that we're being aware of that. If we make something our main meditation object, and every time we sit down to meditate, we use that as our object, it becomes very familiar to us. Yeah, very familiar to us. So when you first meet someone, you have superficial judgments of them. We don't really know them. But over time, if you keep meeting, you get to know each other really, really well. And over the years, very, very clearly know each other. Now, if that person suddenly wasn't there, would you notice their absence? Do you notice their absence? You do, don't you? In the same way, the meditation object, our job is to become very familiar with it. So familiar so that in its absence we notice. So you got mindfulness of breathing, or you might have a mantra, you might have a visualization, you might have mindfulness of the body, relaxing into the body. There's many different techniques, sweeping, doesn't matter what you do. If you're doing a mindfulness practice, this object allows you to know when your attention moves. Yeah? It allows you to know. Yeah? So, if we have a meditation object, let's just say this. Okay, so we've got this clock. Yeah? We have this clock here. I always hold it back to front so you don't get distracted with time. We've got this clock. You're watching this clock. And then something else takes its place. It's no longer present to you. It's no longer present. You can notice its absence. In the same way, when you're meditating and your primary object, your anchoring object, I call it anchoring rather than primary because it's where you anchor your attention. When your attention moves towards something else, it's not present to you. And so you know that. Yeah. So if our attention moves, how do we know that it's moved? This is the test question after what I've just said. How do you know that it's moved? Sorry? It's a very simple answer.
Being mindful.
Yeah, but how do you know it's moved? You know because your primary object is no longer present to you. You're remembering that you're no longer with your primary object. If we didn't have a primary object, if I just said, okay, just sit there and be mindful, what would be the chances of you knowing when your attention moves?
You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know.
It's very, very hard. Very, very hard. Because it moves around, but because you have no reference point, no anchor point, you don't notice. So staying with this primary object allows two things to happen. One, you build up your concentration and mindfulness on it by having something present to you over time. And the second one is you start to notice the nature of your attention moving. You'll start to notice it and feel it move. And this is where there's a lot of depth. So a technique we can use to do this is using labels. Labels help clarify this. They really help clarify it. They're so good. So if we're going to watch the in-breath and the out-breath, so we're watching the breath come in, say just the breath coming in and going out. What would be a good label to point our attention to the breath coming in? Rising and falling, going straight for the traditional ones. It's good to see that some people were listening in the previous time. A traditional label that Mahasi Sayadaw used for the movement of the abdomen was rising and falling. Now you can use that label, rising on the in-breath, falling on the out-breath, but more it's a movement of expanding, contracting, isn't it? But not everyone feels the breathing there. What I want you to do is not think that the breathing has to be in a certain place. It can appear anywhere to you. It could appear in your shoulders, it could appear in your feet, it could appear in your chest, in your abdomen, in the back of the head, other people tip of the nose. But wherever the breath is most obvious to you, that's where I would like you to do your mindfulness of breathing. Rather than getting obsessed with it has to be a certain way. That's a mistake. From day to day it changes where it's most obvious to me. Sometimes it's obvious in two places, sometimes it's in one, sometimes it's not obvious at all. So use a suitable label that means something to you. If it was the tip of the nose, a traditional one is in. With the in-breath, just say in, and out with the out-breath. To remind yourself the breath is coming in, the breath is coming out. I'm watching that. You could say rising and falling. Yeah? You could say expanding, contracting, however you experience it. Just use a label that means something to you. Yeah? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So the way labels works is this. Actually, I'll use the cup. Okay. Can you see this? See the cup? Okay. Now mentally in your head say cup. Cup. Notice how when you say the label in your head, your attention goes to this. See? See how it focuses your attention on it. Now if I was going, where's a good one in this room? I'm going to use Karen. If I said, look over there, you would look over there, but your attention doesn't focus on any point, doesn't it? But if I say, look at Karen, notice how your attention, by saying the word Karen, it goes sum. It goes straight to her. So what you'll find is during your meditation practice, when you use a label, it makes your attention more accurate. Your focus goes to it. Oh, thinking, hearing, yeah? Uncomfortable, comfortable, discussing, arguing, liking, disliking, anxious. Use a label and the label will go straight to it, straight to the experience. Now we use labels in everyday life all the time. Actually, we send our children to school and teach them to be very skilled in using labels. Words are labels. Words are just labels that point at things. They're not actually things. So when I use a word, if I say table, I'm pointing at something. See? Stephen is a label. I am not Stephen. That is not me. My parents created this label, Stephen. Procter is my family name. It points towards my family. But Procter is not my family, and Stephen is not me. It's a label. Labels point towards things. We use them in everyday life all the time. We use them so we can communicate with each other. So the skill of labelling has been brought in because it's something that we all do very naturally, isn't it? We're used to using labels to point our attention towards something. If I said beach, coconut tree, shade, warm water, cocktail, I'm pointing towards something and I've just created an image in your head. This is how labels work. So during meditation, when you learn the skill, you want to be there, dear?
We're in Hamilton in March.
I hit. When you use labels, what it does is it clarifies, it points the attention, it aims the attention, and then the practice develops. So if you teach yourself the skill of labels, what it does is it helps to clarify what it is you're experiencing. Can you see how this works? Yeah. So if you have, say, excessive thinking, let's say an obsessive thought. I'm sure not too many people in this room would have obsessive thoughts. But say you had a thought, you're meditating, or in everyday life if you wanted to, and this thought comes up again and again and again. Instead of just using the word thinking, see what's driving the thought. It might be arguing. It might be remembering, planning, fantasizing, discussing. Yeah? It might have some sort of drive. Regretting. Yeah? You'll see that there's this driving factor behind it. If you use the label will point more towards the emotional charge that's driving the thought rather than the thought itself. And you'll get to know yourself very, very well. When you get accurate enough with that emotional charge, literally that will dissolve and the thought will collapse. Yeah, this is the skill in mindfulness. That's what we're doing. It will collapse because it no longer has its fuel. Yeah, so this is what I want you to do in the practice. So just to sum it up, the labels are used to get to know the experience. So don't get hung up on them. If you know somebody really well, say you know me, you no longer need to use my label to point towards me. You recognise me straight away. Oh, there's Stephen. You don't even have to think it, you know it. In the same way, when you're meditating, if something is very familiar with you, you can drop the label. Yeah? But when something needs clarifying, use the label to increase that accuracy. Yeah? Use it. So that's a tool to be used at the correct time.